Hi, I'm Immodesty Blaize, and I'm going to read to you from my second novel, Ambition. We pick up the story with our heroine, Sienna Starr, who's starting her first day at work in Vegas's biggest show, Venus in Furs. Rows upon rows of makeup stations created long, narrow corridors, which opened out into an equally regimented costume area, its rails and racks climbing up the walls with every fabric, texture and colour catalogued and crammed into their labelled allotted spaces. Endless identical pairs of shoes were pigeonholed. A closer inspection revealed the height of the heels to vary between pairs to compensate for any height difference there may be from dancer to dancer, the official height requirement allowing for just an inch of leeway. The show producer was notoriously exacting about the conditions he placed on the dancers in all his shows, and Venus in Furs was no exception. The entire cast now formed an orderly line behind a pair of scales as Basil, the company mum, weighed each girl and measured her waist, hips and bust. An excited hum sprinkled the atmosphere in the room. "Next," ordered Basil, sticking his pencil behind his ear. Sienna crossed her fingers behind her back as she stepped up onto the scales and willed herself not to look down. She quivered her way through the ensuing pregnant silence before Basil asked her to step off to be measured. Not daring to breathe out as he wrapped the tape around her trim waist, Sienna began to feel lightheaded. "Just a few more seconds, and I can let it all hang out," she told herself, turning pale. "Sienna Starr." "Yes, sir," she puffed, letting her chest heave as she snatched a gulp of air. "These breasts, can you do anything with them?" asked Basil, in his soft but precisely measured British accent. Like what? Tricks? Nipple tassels?" A loud snigger travelled from the back of the queue. Basil rolled his eyes. "They're just too big, dear. Are they the real thing?" Sienna blinked and nodded, terrified. You'll have to take some weight off them then. See if you can get them down at all, dear. At least a cup size." "Oh, but am I too heavy?" "No, your weight's fine, but these assets are going to, stand out, shall we say. This may be a topless review, darling, but it ain't a strip joint. Neat and petite is what we aim for here. See what you can do, dear. Might help if you try not to fling them around on stage. For God's sake, don't stick them out. They'll be under the spotlight before the rest of you gets there." Sienna's face reddened as Basil scribbled in his jotter. "Don't worry," he continued, without looking up from his notes. "Just cut yourself down to 800 calories a day and you'll be there in no time. Oh, and you may as well cut your hair short, dear. Lovely though it is, it'll be ruined from all the wigs and buckram caps. Much easier all round when it's short. Next." Sienna bit her lip and sloped off, suddenly riddled with self-consciousness. She looked furtively at Paige and Honey in the queue and mouthed a good luck at them, before finding her makeup station and slotting herself into her chair. Staring forlornly into the mirror, she scraped her luscious hair back from her face, trying to imagine it cropped, like she had as a gangly, coltish teenager. She sucked her cheekbones in and pouted a little, but it was hopeless. Whichever angle she looked at herself, she now hated the picture staring back, and those C-cups just kept leaping into the frame and catching her eye now. She slumped into her dresser and willed herself to disappear in amongst the furniture. This wasn't her idea of a great first day. She hadn't even danced a step yet. So much for the glamour of the showgirl. Still, this was a dream she had set her heart on, so she was going to have to get used to it, although she couldn't have felt more like a Crufts reject now if she tried. A thick, nauseating smell of musk suddenly assaulted Sienna's palate and brought her head whipping round, just in time to catch Brandy billowing past, making her entrance in some kind of voluminous chiffon blouse arrangement over tight cigarette pants, a large quilted Chanel purse covered in strings of pearls and gold double C's slung over her shoulder. She looked eye-wateringly expensive, and that handbag was to die for, thought Sienna, guiltily wishing Max had bought her a Chanel instead of Hermes, gorgeous though it was. Sienna resisted the sudden urge to light an incense stick to purge her nasal passages of Brandy's perfume, deciding it was so pungent it had probably turned the air flammable anyway. She simply sighed loudly and set about arranging her makeup caddy. She'd packed a small teddy bear within. Well, if she was going to be here a while, she reckoned she may as well give her station a personal touch. Make it her space. She scoured amongst her makeup for some eyelash glue to stick a small photo of her mum in place on her mirror. But within seconds, the piece was shattered as Brandy's cut glass voice screeched out. "I don't care! It's too big! You could stand a pint glass on those cheeks! A lifetime of lipo couldn't salvage that arse! Christ!" Sienna sat at her mirror and cringed at the cruel jibe, feeling instantly sorry for the poor recipient. "But I think she'll lose any excess with a diet, dear," countered Basil's unflappable tones. "And besides, the shape's great. Look at the muscle tone. It's pert and rock solid." "Exactly, and it's way out of proportion. That's the cruelty of genetics, I'm afraid. It ain't gonna budge. I've seen enough to tell. The best she could hope for is a job as J-Lo's stunt arse." Sienna winced as she listened. Brandy was a cow, all right. In her dreams, she could have an arse like La Lopez, thought Sienna. "Stop prodding me like I'm cattle. I'm not a she. I do have a name, you know," shrieked a familiar voice. Sienna gasped and ran to the group of girls clustered around Brandy. Sure enough, there stood her friend Honey in a face-off with the bitch. "Good," snapped Brandy, raising her manicured finger to poke it in Honey's face. "Because you can take your name and make it along with all the other hoochie mamas shaking it over at the Velvet Taco. Believe me, that's the only kind of dancing you should be doing with that backside. And don't worry, there are plenty of men who pay good money to have their faces up close with that weapon of mass destruction." A gasp swept round the room. Honey lunged forward at Brandy, but Basil already had her arms restrained firmly in his hands. Some of the onlooking girls now had the nails nervously up at their mouths, their eyes wide. Brandy simply stood there and smiled calmly as Honey struggled in vain against Basil's grip. "You're so fired," said Brandy evenly.